it was more than the music. It felt like the people that would come to the concerts, that would buy the music, that would kind of come to the cutting edge events back in the day. It felt somehow like more of a movement than a band, and I think that, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but it felt like everyone that was coming to those concerts and being involved, it felt like they were part of the band. I think they felt like that. So like when we went on tour with Bon Jovi, they felt like they were on tour with Bon Jovi, you know what I mean? And came to those shows, and we wouldn't play anything different. We just played My Glorious and History Maker and all that kind of stuff. And so that's what I miss about it, that sort of bigger picture of like a movement.
You're listening to Justice Matters with Tim Buxton, a podcast inspiring the fight for a world where everyone belongs. Hey there, it's great to have you for another episode of the Justice Matters podcast. Today's guest, I just got off the call with him, is none other than Stu G. Now, he's best known as the guitarist, musician, and songwriter for the group, the band, Delirious. Now, it's pretty special for me because growing up as a teenager, Delirious influenced my life. Their music impacted me profoundly. I used to listen to their music for hours and hours, whether it be at youth group, growing up, or in my bedroom, and just it was constantly in my CD Walkman. And so now to be able to sit down and have a conversation with Stu, it really just was a real treat for me personally. Now, I met Stu first back in Chicago. It was at a conference called the Justice Conference, and we met in the green room backstage. And it was there that Stu started to talk to me about this new project he'd been working on called the Beatitudes project. It's this incredible creative work that takes music, takes a book he's written, takes a podcast, a film, and stories, and puts it together in this incredible resource that takes you on a journey in uncovering and peeling back the teachings of Jesus in Matthew 5 called the Beatitudes. Now, we talk a lot about that passage and some of the themes in the Beatitude projects together. In fact, there's times when I felt like we could talk for a long, long time, but we managed to squeeze a lot into this episode. We talk about some of the more personal, reflective experiences that he had growing up and being a part of this band. And I'm just so grateful that I get to share this conversation with you. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Stu G. Stu, it is so good to get you on the podcast. Thanks for Zooming, Skyping in to this, mate, all the way from Nashville, great. Tennessee.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's great to catch up with you again, and I'm looking forward to this very much.
Yeah. So you're not in Great Britain. Most people obviously know you, and your accent gives you away straight off the bat.
Yeah.
But Nashville is home now. How long have you been in Nashville for?
We've been here for 10 years, believe it or not. 10 years this year. And it's been quite a move. But we really love it.
Yeah.
We really enjoy it here. It was a good next step after Delirious finished. Nashville's known as Music City, and I didn't want to hang the guitar up yet, and so I've come here, and it's been good to us.
Yeah, well, you certainly haven't done that, and we'll be talking about some of your own projects as well as the ways you've been collaborating with a lot of other, artists over on the American shores there.
Yeah.
But we met back, Stu, at a justice conference, fittingly for this episode and this podcast, Justice Matters. That's where we met, at this conference in Chicago. In fact, run by a couple at the time, Mark and Vicky Reddy. They were heading things up. Another couple of Aussies whom I'm sure you know. Actually they're from the sunny coast. we'll spend a lot of time on the Sunshine Coast, which is really just close to where I am and a lot of my family lives. So, anyways, we were there. We were in the green room backstage, and I just remember sitting at one of those round tables and just hearing for the first time about what you've been up to, the Beatitudes project, and obviously sharing with you a bit about. At the time, I was living in northern Iraq in the Kurdistan region, and you had a heart for that. I remember. That was for me. It was just wonderful to get to know you as a kid who grew up in youth group, and I probably told you this when I was sitting at the table. You know, Delirious was definitely a top 3 band for me, and I can remember vividly, and I know you probably hear this all the time, but I'm sure it doesn't get old to hear the way the music that you've been a part of releasing to the world has had such a profound influence, and it has on my life. I remember it just days on, it would just be on repeat. The cutting edge ones, that was kind of what really hooked me in, and obviously you guys went on to produce some great other albums, but those early days, that music really struck a chord in my heart, and I know had a real big impact on me and my pursuit of following Jesus and the Jesus way. So thanks for that, Stu. I really again appreciate that.
Thank you for saying that. Thanks so much. Yeah, it never gets old, as you say, to hear that from people, and I'm so grateful to have been a part of it, and I love hearing people's words. I was talking to someone yesterday, and they were saying how the album World Service with the songs Majesty and Rain Down on there, like they still listen to that nowadays. And it's so encouraging, because when you are a part of something like that and it finishes, it can leave quite a hole in your life, and so it's been great to hear from folks on what we did, how much it means to them.
Yeah, like you mentioned, how many years? I mean, it would have been, what was it, 17 years that you were part of Delirious, or is there?
Yes. 17 years was the time from when the first Cutting Edge event happened to the end of Delirious in 2009, right? So, and I was involved. I wasn't involved right at the very beginning, but most of it I was. So at least 16 years I was involved. Wow. So, yeah.
My goodness, I can imagine. Yeah. So tell me what it felt like when. Well, first of all, can you take me back to what it felt like when you were in the midst of it all, and you were, what was it? What was it like? I mean, to be Stu G. I saw you guys in New York at one of your concerts. I had, I've obviously followed you as a faraway fan, and as well as what was it like being a part of such a influential Christian music band?
It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work and a lot of being away. I know that you know what that's like to have a job that takes you away from home. But it had this kind of sense of purpose to it. This extraordinary sense of vision and unity and passion. Like, there was 5 of us in the band, and the longer life goes on, the more you realize that it just doesn't happen very often. This kind of God smiling on something and raising it up in such a way. People would say, we want to do what you do. And we're like, well, we don't know how we did it. It's like, it's just an obedience and hard work, and you just create an environment for God to move and try and, get in the way as least as possible,
Yes.
But anyway, that was it was extraordinary, really amazing times. I'm not sure that the entire story when you are in it. You don't really have the outside view, so sometimes it can feel quite mundane and a drag. But the idea of like getting on a plane or getting in a bus and showing up and playing music to thousands of people is extraordinary. What an extraordinary thing to be able to do. And so I have incredibly fond memories of all that time.
Wow. Is there any talks of a reunion? Has it come up from time to time, or you guys have obviously...
I don't know. I'm in contact with Martin pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And so we chat and we, cheer each other on.
Yeah.
And I guess, no one's saying no. It will never happen. But there's not really any plans.
Yeah.
But we're in touch and love. Obviously, we love each other and have just so much respect for what everyone's doing.
Yeah. So obviously, my next question was going to be, do you miss it? And I think
yeah, absolutely. It was such a huge part of our lives, and so just speaking personally, it was a huge part of my life, and it happened at probably a time for me that was the peak of my life, if you like. It's like if I was a sportsman, that would have been David Beckham in his 20s. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Was that so? It kind of hit a great time for me, and the family was young, and so we were able to actually once a year travel with the families, and so we'd come to America for a couple of 3 weeks, and kind of involve everyone. It was just a dream situation, honestly. So I do miss it a lot. I'll tell you what I miss about it.
Yeah,
is is standing alongside Martin at the front of the stage. And yes, it is about the music and what have you, but it was more than the music. It felt like the people that would come to the concerts, that would buy the music, that would kind of come to the cutting edge events back in the day. It felt somehow like more of a movement than a band. And so I think that, I can't speak for everyone, but it felt like everyone that was coming to those concerts and being involved, it felt like they were part of the band. I think they felt like that. So like when we went on tour with Bon Jovi, they felt like they were on tour with Bon Jovi, you know what I mean? And came to those shows, and we wouldn't play anything different. We just played My Glorious and History Maker and all that kind of stuff. And so that's what I miss about it, that sort of bigger picture of like a movement. And then within that, we didn't have we owned our own record label and production and publishing and what have you. So there was no one telling us that about what we could write and what we couldn't write, So that was fun. I miss that,
Was it Furious Records? Is that what it was? Furious?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Furious Records.
Now
I
remember.
And that was a joke because
really?
The name was a joke because no one was angry or furious, but they other record labels were just so flummoxed as to why we wouldn't sign with them. We just wanted to keep everything ourselves and do everything ourselves, and so that was just a joke. Yeah, they weren't really angry, but I think they were a bit bemused.
Yeah. That's gold. I love that. Yeah. It sounds like in a way though that element of it being a movement, of it being somewhat organic, and you could feel it in the records. You could feel it in for me at least. I think that's why it was so easy to put put the especially for me, Cutting Edge 1 and 2, just put those tracks on repeat. It was just like you were brought into something different than just listening to, well, this is a great track in and of itself and this is a great song. It felt like something a bit more integrated and whole or something. It was great. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, something that I'm grateful about for that time was how it introduced us to the idea of justice work. So, in the traveling and playing and leading worship and releasing records, every now and then we'd get the chance to travel to somewhere like India or Cambodia, Brazil, South Africa, countries where you had the brilliant opportunity to go and visit the most amazing people who live in extreme poverty or are struggling to survive in one way or another, And so we had the chance to have our eyes opened to what was going on in the world.
Wow. Well, I mean, do you think that then moving into like some of the work that you've been dedicated to personally lately, how has that influenced what? And we can kind of pivot to a bit more about your project, the Beatitudes project. How has that kind of those maybe days, or how has Delirious then and that season influenced the work that you're doing now more specifically? And maybe you could explain. I mean, I remember getting after we met with you back in that green room, I remember downloading the Beatitudes Project album and just listening to this beautiful. Again, it wasn't just an album of this song. You've got the interludes of the spoken word, the prayers, the various artists contributing. It's a great album. But maybe you could share broader what it's become and how those early days have influenced that.
Yeah. Well, all through the time of Delirious, if we were ever asked to sign a CD or whatever, and a lot of people would ask you to sign your favorite scripture, it's kind of a youth group thing, I think, and so it was a tough one for me, but I always used to write Matthew 5, 6, 7, Sermon on the Mount, and as we kind of went on, and that was such an essential piece of scripture to me. The Beatitudes kind of came into focus, and they came into focus because there was, 8 themes: poverty, grief, etc., peacemaking, mercy. All these themes, and I kind of had this idea when Delirious was going. I said, let's do a project that's based on the themes in the Beatitudes. It's kind of 8 themes. You could have an 8 or 10 song album, and just be cool. It's always good to sing about making peace, and always good to sing about being alongside the poor and those that need mercy. And so we never got around to doing it, but that always stuck with me, that idea of doing something with the Beatitudes. Well, then what happened was the band finished, and, we did everything we could to finish well. And I guess, we had lots of advice, and we were, cause it was a big deal. You couldn't just take the keys out of a truck, driving at 70 miles an hour and it stops straight away. There was a whole year of like preparing for this.
Still getting over it.
We had to, and we had to have a lot of tough conversations. We had a lot of staff who felt like it was their thing as well. So anyway, it takes a long time to wind something like that down, and so on the outside, you're kind of trying to deal with that and cope with that. But on the inside, I was like really struggling, like, what am I going to do? Is my best work behind me? And in that space, like the way that people suffer with depression or whatever is different for everybody. And I can't say that my pain was any worse than anybody else's. You know, there's no kind of league table in that respect. But I really struggled with that on the inside, you know, and you know, in that upside down moment of transition where something finished and something hadn't yet begun, it was not great. But even in that moment, I kind of had this sense that God wasn't very far away, even if I was making some bad decisions, you know. And the Beatitudes started to come to life for me in a different way as I started to meet people who somehow embodied those things. I began to feel like a different way of thinking about them for myself. So the idea of blessing, right? You know, we think that we have grown up in church, you have this thing about, you know, bless me, bless this person or that person or whatever, you know, or I'm blessed if I need a parking space and I pray and I get it, you know. But the Beatitudes show us where God is, like where God is blessing. And so blessed are the poor in spirit, you know, those whose spirits are crushed, those who are grieving their greatest loss, you know, those who have a poverty of power, like in terms of being meek, and those that hunger and thirst for righteousness and justice. You know, that a lot of translations don't use the word justice in that hunger and thirst for righteousness, but the word that we get righteousness from, the Greek language, actually means righteousness and justice. Yeah. And those two words appear all the way through the Old Testament. But in the New Testament, we just see this word righteousness, but that's because the English language isn't as good as the Greek language, right? And it's and so, like, the idea of like, what do you ache for? You know, when you ache for justice, or you ache for something to be put right that's wrong, right? For a wrong to be put right, and you feel like you haven't got any way of doing that. Like you don't feel like you can contribute in any way. It's so big, you know, that you can't do anything about it. But it's like, I just wish this was different. There's that ache there. Like, that is what the Beatitudes talk to. Like, that's when you are blessed, actually, is when you hunger and thirst and you can't do anything about it. Like the Beatitudes announce that God is on your side in that ache and that lack and that longing.
Justice Matters is brought to you by You Belong. If you'd like to learn more about their work, empowering refugees to integrate and thrive in Australia, head on over to youbelong.org.au. There you'll find ways to get involved, volunteer, and financially get behind the several initiatives they've got going on. There's also a stack of articles and blogs that you'll find there that are really informative and engaging. Now, did you know this podcast is actually a video podcast featured on YouTube? Just search Justice Matters TV on YouTube and watch each episode right there. And while you're there, hit subscribe and get notified each time a new video drops.
So I began to understand the Beatitudes like this, and where the blessing is presence. You know, when life gets turned upside down for us so much, we want a ladder to get out of it. You know, we want a quick way out and a quick fix, or at least we want certainty and answers. And but God doesn't offer us that. He offers us his presence inside the suffering, or inside the poverty of spirit, or whatever it is. And that's the invitation, is like to receive the presence in that. Like, one of the great mysteries of the Christian faith is that we have a co-suffering savior, right? Like, God takes on human form and comes and joins us in the struggle, and in the mess. And that's a great picture of what blessing looks like in terms of the Beatitudes. Like God is on your side in those moments where we get knocked off track. And then it goes on to say, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So it starts to change a little bit. Like, so God is on your side, and God is present with you when you show mercy, and you'll receive it. So there's this invitation to start to live a different way. We've received the grace, if you like, and but it isn't just one way. We're invited to live a different way, because as we do, we receive more. And to live with a pure heart, which we talk about as a undivided heart. Where your true self is on display for all to see. And we talk about peacemaking. And so, I'm talking a lot here, so stop me if you need to. But for peacemaking, I actually went to visit the Holy Land a couple of times, and got to sit on the hill where the Beatitudes were spoken. And I met with Palestinian and Israeli peacemakers, and to ask them, so what is peacemaking? What does it actually look like in a hotspot of violence? In a situation that is contested, in space that is contested, and because I wanted to learn what that means for me back at home, like in the contested spaces of life, and so learn from peacemakers in the Holy Land, and and persecution. You're blessed when you are when you're experiencing a pushback. You must. There's persecution happening all around the world. You've probably got friends who've been persecuted, and we don't experience it like that in the USA. But what does that mean for us? Because these announcements are for every follower of Jesus on the planet, So it means about asking the questions of who am I colluding with? What am I colluding with? Am I colluding with the dominant powers of the world, like racism, sex, violence, money, power, war? Am I colluding with these things, or am I swimming upstream against that, kind of following this different way to be in the world by of this counterintuitive, upside down way of life where I'm hungry for justice, and longing to make a change. So so that I was starting to develop those thoughts, and I started to meet people, and I thought, okay, so this is about music. I'd like to write songs, and I started to write some songs. I started to write with John Mark McMillan and All Sons and Daughters, and my friend Anthony Skinner, and I was on a mission trip actually to Ethiopia, and a friend of mine was on there that I hadn't seen for 9 years, from the UK, and it's a random meeting, honestly, in the back of a bus in Ethiopia, and he's a filmmaker, and he was really fascinated with the conversation we were having around the Beatitudes, and like that we were starting to work on this project. And he said, well, if it needs to be a film, like, let me know. He said, I think it could be amazing. We could work on this together. And I said, well, actually, going in the studio next month to record 3 songs. And he said, well, I'll get someone there and let's figure out, how we're going to pay for it and all that good stuff. And so it started to become a film as well. A book publisher reached out to me and said, these are great conversations. Have you thought about writing a book? And I was like, no. He said, well, would you think about it? Wow. And so that actually spurred me on to find more stories, because I was like, well, no one's going to want to, just hear my version of my journey. So
was this after the album had been produced? Was it and these other projects
No.
came up? Or this was even before you'd
No,
even
it's
got
all
in the
happening
studio?
It all kind of happened at once.
Wow.
Certainly the film, the book, and the songs.
Yeah.
And so, but I wanted to find people who somehow embodied these ideas so that we could give a 21st century lens on these thoughts, because these are ancient words, and these are words that perhaps a lot of people learn in Sunday school as kids.
Oh, sure.
But and you feel like you've got a handle on it, but there's so much surplus meaning.
Right.
And
you might not even be
announcements.
from the Christian tradition, and really you confront these words and righteousness and like you said, they kind of just fly over your head, don't they? But beneath it
absolutely
is this powerful, relevant truth, like you're saying, that needs to be unearthed and revealed.
Yes, because the world is hurting at the minute, right? So we're experiencing all this division, and in America it's crazy because of the election and because of protests and Black Lives Matter and racism, and it's just a big hot pot of division and opinion, and the need for empathy and compassion, and for people to love one another, and for people to engage across differences,
to listen, to not be talking and interrupting like I'm doing right now, but to listen and to, I think we got a showcase of that last night, didn't we? Like the inability to talk about the most important issues that affect all of us, that are complicated, but to do it in a way that is mirrored in these words that Jesus talks.
Yeah, that's right. It's I think they give us a way to do it. So a lot of people have trouble with a couple of questions, like where is God in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of suffering, in the middle of a disaster, and I think the Beatitudes show us where God is. Like he's on the side of the poor, he's on the side of those who are grieving. He's with those who are suffering. He's with the people who are suffering. That's where God is. And then, Jesus said, "I am the way." And that's a big stumbling block to people. And I think the Beatitudes show us the way. They show us what the way is. They give us clues as to how to live, and that is to be compassionate, empathetic, learn how to listen, and to be where God is, be on the side of the poor and the vulnerable and the oppressed. And our lives can be changed forever in that way. We can learn how to engage with each other with more compassion.
Yeah. What I love is what Jesus shares in the Beatitudes, he backs up with his life and his action, which actually makes what he shares even more true, if I could say that, and even more profound, because it was a life spent for the outcast, spent for those that had no voice, the way he elevated and treated women in that society, the way, like you said, those that were powerless, whether they be ethnically or racially on the outside, he brought in and valued. He modeled it in every which way. And I think, for me, that's obviously been such a central driver in my own life and the decisions and choices I've made, and the knowing that I have a great responsibility as someone who would identify as someone that follows him,
Yeah, that's great. So, so a couple more things. Just give you an example of some of the stories and some of the people that I met then. So
That'd be great.
poverty of spirit. I went to India, and because I think that Jesus probably just said, "Blessed are the poor."
Yeah.
And Matthew, who wrote the gospel, used the language "poor in spirit," which does include more. It broadens the spectrum, which is a very clever thing to do, actually. But yeah, so I wanted to see extreme poverty.
Yeah.
And I wanted to include that conversation.
Yeah.
And then I found I met a guy who's now a friend who had been on Wall Street.
Wow.
He was a hedge fund guy.
Yeah.
I don't know what the job title is, but multi-millionaire.
Yeah.
He was making millions of dollars every year. And I asked him, what does poverty of spirit look like to a multi-millionaire on Wall Street? And he talked about addiction. He talked about the love of money, actually, as being a poverty of spirit. And how he told his story about how he ended up actually walking away from his firm, even though they offered him a bonus of $8 million. And he walked away, and he personally started a non-profit to help feed the poor in food deserts in California. And so there's his story. And then I'll just say a couple more. So obviously we talked about peacemakers, was in the Holy Land with Palestinian and Israeli peacemakers. And then mercy, I talked to a woman who'd been on death row for 27 years. And she was guilty of the reason she was there in the first place. But she had a story of in prison being shown mercy, getting herself right with God, and having the opportunity for parole, and actually had parole. And the governor commuted her sentence from a death sentence to life with the possibility of parole. And so extraordinary story. And then also women who are survivors of prostitution, addiction, and trafficking, that from an organization called Thistle Farms in Nashville here. I spent time with them and told their stories.
Wow.
As to what mercy looks like to them too. So that's the kind of vibe of it. So, and then with the song side of it, like with the women's mercy stories, I actually asked Amy Grant to come and write a song with me, and she said yes and helped me record it. And so it kind of happens like that. And then I invited loads of friends, my musician friends, to come and collaborate with me. So there's people like Audrey Assad, Matt Maher, John Mark McMillan, Hillsong United, Martin Smith did one with me, and Amanda Cook, and there's a whole host of people. And like you say, we have some spoken word poetry with music on the album, but we have more in the film too. We had artists, two artist friends of mine painted paintings to represent each beatitude, then when that was all finished and we made the film, we had released the film, I made a study guide for that for small groups and for people to dive deeper into it a little bit. And now we've got that all put into an online e-course, which has all happened since COVID hit.
Oh, really?
Because I was I thought the plan was that I would get out and do some events and share this message and what have you, and then that just all completely went away. And so a friend suggested that we put everything into an online e-course, and so we've built that over COVID. over quarantine, and that's all now available. Done a podcast as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've enjoyed listening to the podcast, obviously, that you put together. And I'm sure that e-course for now, for a lot of churches or a lot of groups that can't gather physically, I know there's larger churches here in Australia, and we don't even have an issue at all, really, comparatively,
Right.
at least where I'm from, with COVID at the moment. And so, but what a great resource for people to be able to go that next level journey, I guess, with the accompanying, music and the book and film. I mean, that must be pretty awesome just to see all these accompanying kind of mediums kind of bringing forth this central theme.
Yeah. I love it. It's been it's definitely a life work for me.
Yeah.
And I hope that it's helpful to people. And I'm just real thrilled to have done it. And I'd love as many people to see it as possible.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my conversation with Stu Gerard, or Stu G, as he's more affectionately known from the band Delirious. But as always, we continue the conversation, and you can hear that by becoming a patron. Now, all you have to do is head over to patreon.com/Justice Matters, where for as little as just $5 a month, you can get access to the bonus content, behind the scenes, extras, and interact with myself a little bit more if you would like to do that. Now, speaking of Patreons, special shout out to Ruth Zamblo, who was the latest Patreon to join us. Thank you so much for being a part of the team to helping us produce this show. And I've got another big announcement for you. On November 14th, which is just a couple weeks away, I am going to be jumping out of an aeroplane. Yes, we've got a fundraising event for You Belong. It's called Dive to Thrive, and along with other refugees and other team members of You Belong, we're going to be heading up into a plane and skydiving. I'm absolutely nervous as all, and but we're doing it for a good cause. We're doing it to be able to continue the work that we do to help empower refugees to integrate and thrive here in Australia. Head on over to mycause.com.au and search Dive to Thrive, and you can sponsor any one of the people jumping out of the planes. We would so appreciate your support, and I really appreciate your prayers too. As I jump out of a plane, I'm super, super nervous. Now, as we always do in every episode, I really want to take the time to thank those that make this podcast possible. And special mention goes to music artists John Art and David Gungle. They're also known as The Brilliants, and they provide the music for the show. Go check them out wherever you find good music. And as always, I want to shout out to Jose Biotto. He's the audio-visual engineer who edits and films and does everything technical, because I don't really know how to do much of that myself. He does such a fantastic job, and I really appreciate you, mate. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast, as always, we would ask that you would rate it. You can rate it on Apple Podcasts. You could rate it on Spotify. You can even subscribe to us on YouTube. In case you didn't know, it is a video podcast. So head on over to justicematters.tv and you can learn about all the ways that you can support the podcast. We really need your support. Guys, join me again soon for another episode of Justice Matters. I am your host, Tim Buxton. Thanks for listening.